Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Mr Mitchell.
Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Chris Whafoi. Taloha ni, Mr
Maloni, Mr Speaker. Mr Chair. Can I just begin just by acknowledging the new member in the chair who will shepherd this bill through the House, Mark Mitchell, who has taken over from, I believe, the Honourable Todd McLean now. And I do want to genuinely say that he has approached us, even in the short time that he has been in charge of this bill, in a genuine way to try and talk through some of the particulars that he has spoken about in order to try and garner more support for it in the House. Unfortunately, for Mr Mitchell, we are unable to do that because I'd like to take a couple of words that he used. We, as he said, this is a lovely country, and the National Party says there is no room for gangs. And we would go a little bit further, and I'd like to use the words penned by the Honourable Phil Goff, that Labor has no truck with gangs. Labor has no truck with gangs at all, and especially with their culture that promotes and encourages criminal activity. So we are absolutely opposed to the criminal activity with gang, and as we say, the side of the House has no truck with gangs, and that's certainly one thing that we do agree with Mr Mitchell. However, we do believe, and as Mr Mitchell said, that this is not a panacea, and that this is not a silver bullet, and that it won't actually be effective in achieving Clause 3, I believe, of the bill, which is the purpose, and I'm just going to flip to that very quickly, of this bill, which is to prohibit the display of gang insignia on premises of departments of the public service, the police, Crown, local authorities and schools. And we do not believe it will be able to achieve that for a number of reasons, but we also believe that the power already exists within current law to achieve what this bill sets out to do. And Mr Chair, I would just, if any member of this Parliament would like to take a trip to Porirua, even if you want to do it tonight, the front door of the Porirua police station has a sign on it which says gang patches are not to be worn in that station. Is that the one they've closed? So, no, it hasn't been closed yet, Mr Goff. But I just want to reiterate, these powers already exist, and in some way they are being expressed, and that has definitely been expressed at my local police station in Porirua, where I say again that, that there are to be no gang patches to be worn in that police station. This bill, as it was first drafted, also had a number of anomalies. And I won't blame Mr Mitchell for that because it wasn't authored by him. It was actually authored by Todd McLean. But it did contain a number of anomalies, and that was that if there were to be a bus shelter on council land and you were wearing a gang patch, then that would be prohibited. But if you just happened to be standing on council land and there were on the sidewalk, then that behaviour would not be covered. But I do want to acknowledge the New Zealand First MP, Richard Prosser, who I understand has put a supplementary order paper in, number 253, which is an amendment to Clause 4, which in the definition of a government premises, in the paragraph that says after any structure, which is on line 29, page 4, according to this, Mr Prosser wants to include any associated grounds. So I think that would, and I'm looking at Mr Prosser, that would alleviate any anomaly that I've spoken about here, where we don't have a physical structure and where you'd have an anomaly where if you're in a bus stop you would be breaking this law, but if you just happen to be on the sidewalk or at a sports ground, you would not. So I would like to congratulate Mr Prosser and New Zealand First Party for putting forward that SOP, which would certainly address the anomaly in the bill there. I understand New Zealand First is supporting that, but I guess from our perspective, the anomaly in the law, in the bill as it stands now, was one of the points that we made, certainly in our strong opposition, and I guess you must give credit to Mr Prosser for taking some action there and making sure that that is taken. Mr Chair, speaking again to the purpose of this bill, Clause 3, we don't believe that this bill will make any significant difference to the real problems that the gangs create in our community. We do believe it exists for political purposes, and I guess you can say that because Todd McClay is now a minister, he has benefited from this bill being put forward. Mr. Chair, I also want to just point out that under Part 1 we have some definitions, or at least a list of gangs that will be included in this bill. And one of them, Mr. Chair?
Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. With that list of gangs that are contained within this bill, there is going to be an onus on the police, I guess, to police those gangs. Given the pressure that our police are under at the moment, you're going to have to ask the question about how effectively they can do that. Now, Mr. Mitchell was in a very, I guess, calm Law and Order Select Committee hearing earlier today, but in that. In the submissions from the police, in terms of the police budget, we saw, in effect, from the police answers, that over the next 4 years, that $113 million in real terms is going to be taken out of the police budget. So that is going to put our police and the resources that our police have under huge pressure. And I guess they are feeling the effects of that pressure already, and to put this added responsibility on them to police this prohibition of gang insignia in government premises bill will be another onus on them when they're already finding things very, very tough. Can I just reiterate the words of the Honourable Phil Goff, that Labor has no truck with gangs. We also truck with a T, that's right. It's also our view that it will be far better to enforce the laws that already exist under current legislation to be able to take some effective action. We did have a number of very good submissions from in the Select Committee stage, Mr. Chair. I did want to point to one that was actually in support of the bill, but to say, and that is to the Murupara Area School, who I thought gave a very good submission. They made two main points: that they didn't want their children and students to see gang insignia plastered about their school, and they thought that those kids needed to be protected from it. They also made the point that the introduction of the gang insignia into their school would create tension and unnecessary negative behaviour, and they wanted to discourage that type of behaviour in their school. Now, I completely and utterly understand that, but what we would say on this side of the House is that the law already exists for them to prevent people with gang patches from going onto their premises, just as it is with our police stations. The schools that have problems right now have the ability to ban people with gang patches coming onto their premises. So I would say to the Murupara Area School that while they gave a very good submission to this bill, and while they have serious concerns and gave a very good submission to the bill, they actually already have the power to do what is contained within this bill, Mr. Chair. And that was just one of the very good submissions that came to this Select Committee. As I did say also, the anomalies in this bill, I'm glad that they have been addressed. I wanted to also say that this bill won't address the drivers of the gangs, and that is youth unemployment, an issue that this government hasn't addressed, and also, I guess, and when you look at the major gangs, and they would be the likes of the Mungo Mob and the Black Power, especially in young Māori and Pacifica. And unfortunately, they are a group of people that this government has forgotten about, because you will see that in the high youth unemployment in both of those areas. I think it was the Black Power that said this government was doing good things for their recruitment, because it is creating a lot of disenchanted youth, and I think that's a very sad indictment on this government. Mr. Chair, I'm going to wrap it up there, but as I say, Labor has no truck with gangs. This is not this is, while I think, a well-intentioned bill, Mr. Mitchell, we don't think it's going to be effective. We think that the current laws that exist can actually do the job of what this bill sets out to achieve.
Mr. Chairman, I call the Honourable Phil Goff.